In the meantime, welcome to NFL Fantasy Live, presented by Hellsberg Diamonds. I'm Marcus Grant with Cynthia Freeland, Kimmy Checks, and Adam Rank. And before we get into the business of predicting what's going to go down at Allegiant Stadium, let's grab our cups and sip a little TNFT, shall we? Start with, according to NFL Media's Tom Pelissero, Chargers receivers Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are both game-time decisions. Allen's dealing with a bad hamstring, while Williams has a back injury. Pelissero says running back Austin Eckler, however, is good to go with his quad injury. So, Rank, back to the receiver news. How concerned are you about Justin Herbert if he's down one or maybe even two of his top targets?
Well, this is definitely a big deal. Obviously, if Keenan Allen is out, he's one of the best receivers in the game. That has a huge impact. But don't overlook the significance of what Mike Williams means to this offense. Last week, when he went out against the Atlanta Falcons, Justin Herbert wasn't able to go downfield. He attempted 44 passes. 7 of them were of 10 yards or more, so they couldn't move the football. And I'm really worried that if Mike Williams is not on the field tonight, they could run into similar problems. And Herbert has really struggled. And so now if you're looking at your roster and you have a quarterback like Kirk Cousins available to you, Ben Roethlisberger, these are quarterbacks I would feel comfortable sliding in ahead of them in your lineup. I know, and weirdly, I see a lot of you who have Josh Allen and Justin Herbert. This decision is easy. Start Josh Allen in that NFL Network game on Saturday. So make that adjustment right now.
Absolutely big news with the Fantasy Super Bowl right on the horizon. Some more TNFT. We'll turn back the clock on a Thursday to find the highest scoring Charger in a TNF game. It was Mike Williams back in Week 15 of 2018 against the Chiefs. The wideout caught 2 touchdown passes while running for another. Williams finished with 36.5 fantasy points, which is the most ever for him in a single game. As for the Raiders' highest scoring player on Thursday Night Football, it's former Oakland receiver Amari Cooper. He had 11 catches for 210 yards. That was also against the Chiefs. Cooper got in the end zone twice as well, put up 44 fantasy points that night. The highest scoring Raider on Thursday Night Football since then is Josh Jacobs with just over 19 fantasy points in Week 10 of last season. All right, let's get this party started with a little bit of feast or fade. I will give you a player in tonight's game. You'll tell me whether or not he is going to go off, a.k.a. feast, or whether or not you should avoid, a.k.a. fade, that player in your fantasy lineup. So, Kimmy, we'll start with the aforementioned Justin Herbert. He had over 300 yards and 2 touchdowns in the Week 9 matchup against the Raiders. Feast or fade this time around?
Now, originally, it was a full because I think the matchup is there against Las Vegas. But with the news of both Mike Williams and Keenan Allen being questionable, I don't quite know how I feel about Justin Herbert. As Rank mentioned, he has kind of struggled as of late. Now, the reason why it could have been a feast is because 300-plus passing yards in 6 games this season, over 20 fantasy points in 7 of the last 10 games. But that's when he had a healthy receiving core. Rank mentioned some other streaming options, right? You have Big Ben. You also have Kirk Cousins. But there are more guys available with decent matchups this week, one being Tom Brady against the Atlanta Falcons. They're allowing the most fantasy points against opposing quarterbacks this season, as well as Jared Goff taking on the New York Jets. The Jets are still winless, and they're allowing the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Now, I understand that so much is on the line with this fantasy playoff push, so I would say maybe stream another option like those guys we mentioned over Justin Herbert.
All right, Rank, we're going to go to the other quarterback, Derek Carr, who had just 14 fantasy points in this matchup back in Week 9. Feast or fade tonight?
Yeah, I believe that this is a feast. He's been playing really well over the last couple of weeks where he scored at least 23 fantasy points in back-to-back games, 315 yards plus, a pair of touchdowns plus in each of those 2 games. And he's going up against the Chargers, who've allowed the 10th most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. If you've seen the Raiders struggle over the last couple of weeks, there is no doubt that it is not Derek's fault. He has been playing very well, and he is another quarterback that you could probably stream this week over Justin Herbert.
Hey, Cynthia, Austin Eckler did not play this game last month. Does he feast or fade tonight?
He is a gigantic feast. I mean, even if those receivers go, they're likely banged up, which means let's go Eck. Also, you know, the matchup, it's really great for the situation. Vegas is allowing the 3rd most fantasy points per game to running back this season, 10th most receptions per game to running backs. Okay, let's go with all of that. and then you've got potentially banged up people and their pass catchers. So I say all about Eck in this one.
Absolutely, especially if those receivers, as we mentioned, are out. For me, Josh Jacobs, he's a snack. He'll kind of get full, maybe not gorge himself. The Chargers are slightly below average against fantasy running backs this year. They are giving up 120 rush yards per game, but not so much in terms of the fantasy points. Jacobs had just under 14 points against the Chargers back in Week 9. I think you can expect right about that number, maybe a little bit more. I don't think it's going to be necessarily a huge bonanza, but it won't be terrible either. All right, Kimmy, how about Keenan Allen? If he is a go, he's the wide receiver 9 from Week 9 in their game. So feast or fade here in Week 15.
All right, if Keenan Allen suits up and plays, then he is a cautious snack, because the reality is, even if he does suit up, his snaps are probably going to be limited, as well as his production. It's sad because this matchup was so good. The Raiders have allowed 16 receiving touchdowns to wide receivers this season, but I just don't know if I have full faith in Keenan Allen being enough on the football field to score me fantasy points. Like Cynthia mentioned, I could see Austin Eckler getting involved in the passing game instead. So Keenan Allen is a very, very cautious snack if he suits up.
Tough spot for Keenan Allen managers, because if he plays, it's hard to leave him sitting on your bench. Rank, as for Darren the Baller Waller, more than 13 fantasy points against the Chargers last month. Does he feast or fade tonight?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, we're going with Darren Waller here. The one thing that we really like about him is that he has been consistent. I know that he had that stretch where he was good one week, bad one week. Well, last week he had 14 fantasy points, so he snapped it. Congratulations. That part of it is out. And the thing that we really love is how many times he's being targeted. He is getting, on average, 9 targets per game. That's second amongst tight ends. I'm going to assume the first is Travis Kelce, and that's the only tight end who has scored more fantasy points than Darren Waller this season. So this is an obvious play. Make sure he's in your lineup.
Darren Waller has maybe not been quite elite, but as close to it as you can get without actually crossing over into that threshold. This is not the last that we will talk about this game. Cynthia will have her best daily lineup a little bit later on in the show in Best Day Ever. Meanwhile, we are just a few hours from kickoff. The Chargers and the Raiders, a classic AFC West matchup, 7:30 p.m. Eastern on NFL Network, Fox, and streaming on Prime Video. And don't miss NFL Game Day kickoff coming up right after us at 6 p.m. Eastern. Turn our attention to some headlines, just in case you missed it. Dallas Cowboys running back Ezekiel Elliott was limited on Thursday with a calf injury. It's been a pretty rough year in fantasy for the 2019 RB3. This year, Zeke is averaging almost 5 fewer fantasy points per game. So, Rank, if you're counting on him as a flex this week, are you happy with this against the Niners starting him?
Not thrilled at all, but this is one of those situations where I really would need to see your options. You know, if you're sitting there with James Robinson and Mike Davis, then of course, you're starting one of those guys. I'm in a league where my running backs are Jeff Wilson and Lynn Bowden. Like I would be so happy to have Ezekiel Elliott in my lineup, even though he's going up against the 49ers, who've allowed the 5th fewest fantasy points to running backs this season. He's still an elite level talent. He still has the ability to, put out a good game. The problem is the Cowboys just haven't really played well this season. Injuries on the offensive line and to the quarterback have kind of limited him. Mike McCarthy also has never really done well with running back. So this is an unfortunate situation. You just got to hope for the best if you're sliding him into that flex spot.
And the specter of Tony Pollard keeps bothering a whole lot of folks who are starting Ezekiel Elliott. When it comes to playoff hopes, the Niners are in must-win mode at this point. So that means they may need the return of all-world tight end George Kittle more than ever. He was designated to return from injured reserve on Wednesday from the foot injury that sidelined him for 7 games. Now, Cynthia, it is a long shot that Kittle gets back on the field, but if he does get the green light, what are your projections for him against the Cowboys?
If he gets the green light, it's a party in the USA, which is still going through my head. And you're absolutely playing him. 6 receptions, 54 yards. The touchdown will be there. If he's good to go, they will target him. 7+ targets in 4 of the past 5 games he played. 23 fantasy points in 2 of the last 5. You know that he wants to see the end zone. Like, this is George Kittle. He's not going to, he's either playing or not. It's binary. There's no kind of half George Kittle.
Fantasy manager's hoping he comes in like a wrecking ball if he's able to get back on the field. Saints quarterback Drew Brees has taken some first-team reps in practice this week and has a chance to start Week 15 against Kansas City. Our NFL insider Ian Rappaport says it's not out of the realm of possibility. Now, Brees is still on injured reserve, but is designated to return. Head coach Sean Payton did add, however, that it's a, quote, functionality issue. It's throwing without soreness. Now, if Brees is able to get back on the field, I do think there are some better streaming options. You heard Rank and Kimmy kind of go through a few of those. I don't love the matchup for him against the Chiefs, but it does mean better things, I think, for Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas, who can count on a few more targets and a little bit more production through the passing game with Brees, as opposed to playing with Taysom Hill. Lions quarterback Matthew Stafford remains sidelined again in today's practice with rib and right thumb injuries. Interim head coach Darrell Bevell says he plans to take Stafford's status to, quote, the end of the week. So if you have any Lions stock, you want to watch this one closely tomorrow when the practice reports come out again. But, Rank, do you have any concerns with Chase Daniel under center if Stafford can't go when it comes to any of the Lions pass catchers you have?
Yeah, absolutely not. I've seen Chase Daniel up close. I like him a lot. And I know I'm a Bears fan, so my calibration for good quarterback play is kind of skewed. Like it's like getting a sushi recommendation from somebody in Lincoln, Nebraska, which is fine, but it's like you don't have the expertise of those of us who live on the coast. But I have seen Chase Daniel come in and be effective. So if I have TJ Hawkinson, if I have Marvin Jones, I don't sweat this for a second. He's a capable backup, maybe one of the best in the game right now. So I'm starting those guys with no hesitation.
You're going to get a lot of angry tweets. That's all I know about that. Falcons wideout Calvin
People don't
Ridley
like Chase Daniel?
Yeah, that's exactly why, yeah. Calvin Ridley was limited again today in practice with a foot injury. The Falcons haven't had Julio Jones in 2 out of the last 3 games, and Ridley's averaged 21.7 fantasy points in those contests. Oh, by the way, Julio did not practice today as he's still battling that hamstring injury. Now, Kimmy, this week, Ridley gets the Buccaneers, who are allowing the most fantasy points to wide receivers over the last 4 games. So how fired up are you about this?
I mean, I would love to be fired up about Calvin Ridley if he does suit up because, like you said, such a favorable matchup against Tampa Bay, who are allowing nearly 40 points to the wideout position. Now, Ridley did miss a brief part of last week's matchup to have that foot that's been bothering him examined, but he still managed to play 84% of the snaps and got back-to-back 100-plus receiving yard games. Now, he's had 15-plus fantasy points in 3 straight, and he will see another significant role if Julio Jones does sit yet again, which you kind of just alluded to could be the case, Marcus. So if he is suited up and ready to go, you should fire him up in your starting lineup.
Ridley's production has stayed fairly flat this season with or without Julio. The Ravens put wideout Marquise Hollywood Brown on the COVID-19 reserve list on Wednesday. Our NFL insider Ian Rappaport says this is most likely a close contact situation and that he will be eligible to play Sunday at Jacksonville if his tests come back negative. So, Kimmy, we'll stick with you. How much do you like Brown this week?
You know, we saw Hollywood Brown haul in that massive reception from Lamar Jackson for a touchdown on Monday Night Football, his 3rd straight game getting into the end zone. Now, if he is lifted off of that COVID-19 reserve list and he does suit up, I do think that he does have a pretty safe double-digit floor this week, especially against Jacksonville, who are the 8th worst against wideouts, giving up nearly 40 fantasy points to the position. So I know he hasn't been the Hollywood that we expected, but I do think the floor is there and he could be started against Jacksonville.
Welcome back. It's time to raise your game, presented by EA Sports Madden NFL 21. Cynthia and I have some rookies that you may want to consider keeping in some of your keeper leagues and still feel good about surrendering the draft pick round that you'd have to give up in order to hold on to those guys. So, Cynthia, who are a couple of rookies that folks may want to hold on to for next year?
Well, so rookies don't know Blue's Clues, which is apparently what this chair looks like that my producer thinks. But Justin Jefferson is someone you should absolutely be keeping. His average draft position, just the 11th round. So you don't even need to worry about that in most leagues. He had 100-plus receiving yards in 5 games this season. He's pretty much not a rookie in terms of stats. 24% target share. That ranks 9th among wide receivers. In my altogether way too early, ridiculously early projections, he's about wide receiver number 5 for the entire season next year. So this is a guy who you're going to be getting El Cheapo. And then because I'm a Lions fan, no, this has nothing to do with being a Lions fan. I like DeAndre Swift's opportunity in the next season. I mean, new change, new regime, new opportunities. I think it's going to be nothing but upside. He had a really great rookie season, and for a 7th-round ADP, you're going to get a guy who had 16.83 fantasy points per game since week 6. That ranks number 10 among running backs. And of course, there's Adrian Peterson, who, he's not the youngest guy. He probably knows Blue's Clues, but ultimately, he's probably not going to be as effective if he's even on the team next season.
I will keep the running back theme going, and another guy who wears blue for whatever that's worth. Cam Akers, who has become the new hotness in Los Angeles the last couple of weeks. Played 71% of the snaps the last 2 games. Got him in an ADP of 6th round or later, depending on when you drafted. And this is a guy who could, because of the hype, get bumped up maybe to the 3rd round in a lot of drafts next season. The other one is Brandon Ayuk, who I think if he had played a full season, we would be talking about his production on par, sort of with Justin Jefferson. 12th among all wide receivers in fantasy points per game, 2nd among rookie wide receivers behind Jefferson in fantasy points per game. And this is a guy who went undrafted in a lot of leagues. So you may be talking about surrendering maybe a last round draft pick if you decide to keep him. So we go from those 4 rising stars to a couple of comets in Green Bay.
Snap A-Rod out of the shotgun. Throws right side, back shoulder. Oh, Devontae's got it. Slips by one man. Cuts left to the 30, to the 20. He's going to go all the way. Touchdown, Green Bay. 56 yards.
Wayne, can you say run after the catch?
Whoa, I guess.
Devontae Adams made Deron Harmon just look sick in the open field.
That was your top stack from week 14. It was Aaron Rodgers to Devontae Adams. Now, Rank, that duo combined for over 55 fantasy points, and we need to give a shout out to the man that predicted that pick. It's the very first time this season that one of us got the top duo correct, and it was neither of us. It was Marcus. Marcus, it was you. You were filling in for Rank last Thursday. Congratulations. Oh, really? Really? Stacks on stacks. Okay. All right. We get it, cornball. All right, Rank, we need to make up for this. Let's see if we can do what MG did last week. Rank, kick us off with your favorite stack of week 15.
Yeah, that was very subtle as the Empire State Building. But let's talk with this triple stack in Minnesota. I'm going to go Kirk Cousins, Adam Thielen, and Justin Jefferson. Now, we all know, I talked about this earlier in the show. Please don't. Nope, we're not doing this. Listen, I'm trying to give good advice while talking about how well he's going to do against my favorite team. But you cannot deny the numbers. 3 passing touchdowns in 6 consecutive home games, 300 passing yards in 4 out of his last 5. Adam Thielen is awesome. I mean, this is one of the guys that you play every week, no matter the matchup. Justin Jefferson is one that I really want to key in on because last time he played the Bears, he had 8 receptions, 135 yards. He was matched up against Jalen Johnson, the rookie out of Utah, who's played very well this season. But again, please, not the horn. We don't need the horns. I'm just trying to say Justin Jefferson has got a great matchup this week as Jalen Johnson's battling an injury.
Okay, I love your triple stack. Again, I need a heads up when you're going to do a triple stack so I can compete. Sure. But mine is a duo. It's Lamar Jackson to Mark Andrews, and the matchup is there. Now, both of these guys just had an explosive game on Monday Night Football. It was the very first time this season that Lamar Jackson had back-to-back 25-plus fantasy points and 94-plus rushing yards and finished as the quarterback numero uno. Now, though he rushes the ball, he also throws it, and one of his favorite targets is the tight end, Mark Andrews. Andrews has seen 5+ targets in 5 straight games, and both of these guys have the matchup in their favor this week. Jacksonville is allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to quarterbacks and the 2nd most receiving touchdowns to tight ends this season. So fire up both of these guys easily. Rank, who's your next one? Is it a triple stack? Is it a duo? What we rocking with?
It's a quadruple. No, it's not quite that. I'll just go back to a double stack. I'm going to go with Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs. I think that this is one that we kind of overlook week in and week out. Josh Allen, stepped back into main event status over the last couple of weeks. He's had at least 27 fantasy points in 3 out of his last 5 games, 6 rushing touchdowns on the season. He's going up against the Denver Broncos, who have allowed a top 12 fantasy quarterback in 6 of their last 11 games. And of course, Stephon Diggs, the whole reason he wanted out of Minnesota, they didn't throw the football enough. Now he's got an opportunity with Josh Allen. And this was the top duo in week 2. I believe that they can get it done on Saturday here on the NFL Network.
Okay, mine is actually a quadruple stack. Are you ready? No, I'm kidding. But it is 2 guys that you love. It's Mitch Trubisky and Allen Robinson. I do this for you, Adam Rank. I do this for you, my friend. Big Mitch has thrown 3+ touchdowns and had 18+ fantasy points in 2 of the last 3 games, including last week against the Houston Texans, where he bought in his season high in fantasy points. Now, his receiver, Allen Robinson, has been hot in that exact same stretch, 27+ fantasy points in 2 of the last 3 games and 70+ receiving yards in 10 games this season. Only Allen Robinson and Travis Kelce share that stat line. Now, it's a divisional matchup game that bodes well for the 2 of them. The Vikings allowing 2 passing touchdowns a game and the 5th most fantasy points to wideouts. It's there. It's amazing. It's your Chicago Bears.
Anybody who has been to Vegas knows that every day there is either the best day ever or the worst day ever. We'll try to get you on the right side of that ledger as Cynthia Freeland puts together a daily lineup for those of you who are more DFS minded. So as always, we'll start with the MVP, the player who you would like for you to get 1.5 times the points. Who is that going to be for you this week?
So I'm going with Justin Herbert. I understand that the wide receivers are questionable. However, I still have a nice projection for him. And remember, in this format, this isn't something where you could go pick up Ben Roethlisberger. This is just for today. So it really comes down to, will it be Carr or will it be Herbert? And for me, I have more fantasy points for Herbert. So there he goes. He slides right in as my MVP. And then that, of course, means my first flex. Well, of course it's going to be Derek Carr because I could get both quarterbacks. Yes, the answer is always yes to that. And then next up, I want Hunter Renfrow. For the price here, I can afford to pay up for other people, and I really like the opportunity against the Chargers. He had 8 fantasy points against them in Week 9, 5+ targets in 3 straight games, 9.93 fantasy points per game since Week 12. So it's really a nice situation for a slot guy who is going to get me at least, 8 points that I need. So then that leaves me enough room, of course, to fit in one more smaller priced guy, and that's Tyron Johnson. And then I can pay up here for some flexibility, the ultimate flex at Flex 4, which means I'm going to put Keenan Allen in there. But if closer to game time it comes up, I'm going to pivot, and I still have room for Eck there. So it's either going to be Austin Eckler or stick with Keenan Allen. Just depends on the injury reports. You got to watch NFL Network to know who's active and who's inactive.
Yeah, stay up to date with all that because that is going to change a whole lot of fantasy highlights, fantasy lineups, I should say. In the meantime, hopefully Cynthia helps you, as Brent Musburger would say, hit jackpot, baby.
Jackpot.
Thank you for that. Jackpot.
It is time once again. Here comes the hype train to bring you some fantasy zen. And the name is Rank, Adam Rank, and my guy Marcus Grant and I have sold hype trains from Brockway to Ogdenville and North Haverbrook.
And by golly, we've put them on the map.
Now let's fire up the hype train. Let's get the power tilting full max because this is the segment that has been endorsed by the most USC Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks. Marcus, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Come on, Marcus, I need you to feel it.
I'm ready, but you're going to feel it if you don't get off the track.
Hey, here they come. Let's get out of here. Marcus, it is the semifinals, and I need you to believe. I need you to believe. And my favorite quarterback in the league might be this rookie lefty. But if you left him on the bench last week, you might be a little testy. He torched the Chiefs. This young man was on fire, but all those points were on the bench like a great big funeral pyre. So, Marcus, I don't know if we can make the same mistake again. But please tell me, are we going to go against the grain? Yeah, I used the Jericho thing there to show me Tua Tagovailoa.
I think we might have to leave him on the bench. I don't know that I'm totally on board this week. It's been, look, the last couple of weeks, he's actually been very good. He has certainly picked it up, especially from a passing standpoint. But Patriots versus rookie quarterbacks, I mean, just no bueno. Look at what happened to Justin Herbert just a couple of weeks ago. And that alone, sure, if losing 45-0 is fine, that alone has me a little bit nervous about Tua this week.
Yeah, that's the one thing. I don't know if it was a Tom Brady thing to go down and struggle in South Beach, but I do know Bill Belichick against rookie quarterbacks for the exact same reason that you just said. I'm not making that mistake again. All right, let's stay down there in Miami. Let's get a little nuts. There are so many running backs out this week, and it's kind of kicking our butts. We probably won't have CMC, Antonio Gibson, and there's a chance we have no Raheem. I like to think back to August when I had Saquon Barkley, the guy from Cincinnati, and oh my gosh, was that a dream. Now, I picked this guy up, just the other day. Don't try to tell me he's a receiver. I know where he played. The Dolphins have him listed as a running back, so please don't be Snowden. And so please, Marcus, tell me, are you going to play Lynn Bowden?
I can absolutely make a case to play Lynn Bowden. Had a really nice week last week, and because there are a lot of injuries, a lot of question marks down there in Miami. We're not sure. I mean, Mike Gesicki looks like he might not play. We're not sure what's going on, say with Devontae Parker, even Jakeem Grant. So the Dolphins are in need of some help, and Bowden, especially as a guy who catches the football effectively, I think has some really nice sleeper appeal for the Dolphins.
Yeah, and he is listed on the official chart. We had a huge chat today with the production team of the NFL Fantasy. He's officially a running back, so you can slide him into that spot. Listen, I'm not above. You guys got to do it with Taysom Hill. I want to do it at the running back position because I'm in a lot of trouble here because all those guys that I mentioned, I had at one point or the other. All right, one last one, and we have Saturday football this week, and I could not be more thrilled. So I'll pick a guy from that game as our roster we start to build. I don't know why we've overlooked this guy because he's played like such a stud, and you've been starting who's been quite a dud. He's coming off 3 great weeks. We would call it the fantasy hat trick. So make my Irish eyes start to smile as we talk about Tim Patrick. Show me that train.
I am 100% on board with Tim Patrick, and he really has very quietly put together a nice back half of the season. And compare that to last year as well, when the Broncos had injuries at the wide receiver spot and Tim Patrick stepped in and played well. He's gone 5 straight games with double digits. He's got 4 touchdowns in that span. And with Jerry Jeudy kind of struggling, with Drew Lock needing a place to go, I have no problems with at least flexing, maybe even a wide receiver too for Tim Patrick.
Yeah, they did such a great job in the draft, getting Jerry Jeudy, getting KJ Hamler, who had 2 touchdowns last week. But it's been Tim Patrick who's been the most consistent receiver in this offense. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's his name, because he sounds like a guy who, you went to college with, and he sells insurance now. So I don't know what it is, but we should start Tim Patrick. By the way, shout out to Steve Lemmy, who's on the set of Tacoma FD, watching the show right now. He tweeted us. So I think that's really cool. He enjoys the hype train, so I want to give him a shout.
That's pretty sweet. I also look forward to the Tim Patrick calendar that comes every year from his insurance company there.
Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Live. It is time for my 5. And on Tuesday, I hit you with my 5 players that you couldn't trust. That included guys like Terry McLaurin. I want to call him Scary Terry, but he's not scary right now. Terry McLaurin, Chase Claypool, Ezekiel Elliott, Tyler Lockett, and James Conner. But now, it's the ever-important Week 15. We want to get you into that fantasy championship, so I'm giving you my 5 guys you can trust in Week 15. Let's kick this thing off at number 5. It's Benny Snell at the Cincinnati Bengals on Monday Night Football. Now, we got the news this week that James Conner is dealing with a quad injury, meaning that Snell could see an increased workload in this favorable matchup against the Bengals. They've allowed a top 20 running back in 4 straight contests and are allowing the 4th most rushing yards to running backs this season. Now, back in Week 12, when James Conner didn't play, Benny Snell saw 19 touches and nearly 100 scrimmage yards. Number 4, it's Rob Gronkowski at the Atlanta Falcons. Now, we know tight ends are tough this season, so rely on the ones that could get major work. One of those guys who gets the volume in Week 15 is going to be Gronk against the Falcons. His 5 touchdowns since Week 6 have him tied for the 2nd most amongst tight ends. Now, if that touchdown upside is not intriguing enough, then take a look at the matchup. The Falcons are allowing the 5th most fantasy points to tight end and the 3rd most passing yards per game in the league. Number 3, Marvin Jones Jr. at the Tennessee Titans. Now, getting better as the season progresses, Marvin Jones Jr. has had 13-plus fantasy points in 6 of the last 8 games and 5 receiving touchdowns since Week 7. Now, I've experienced too many weeks where Jones racked up points on my bench, and I don't want to make that mistake again, especially this week with a solid matchup versus the Titans, who are giving up the 3rd most fantasy points to wideouts this season. All right, we're getting closer. It's time for number 2. It's Jared Goff. Now, one of the best streaming quarterback options for this week, going up against the still winless New York Jets. Now, on a bit of a hot streak, Jared Goff has secured fantasy managers 23-plus fantasy points in 2 of the last 4 games. Now, though Goff is balling, a lot of my excitement for him comes from the matchup. The Jets have allowed a top 8 quarterback in 6 straight games, which makes sense for a defense that's 2nd worst amongst fantasy quarterbacks in 2020. All right, Justin, you know the drill. It's drum roll time for this number one spot. Drum roll, number one. Cam Akers again versus the Jets. If I like Jared Goff, then why not also like his entire offense versus the Jets? I love Bobby Trees and Cooper Kupp as well, but my favorite start is Cam Akers. He's had 14 plus fantasy points in 3 straight games, increasing those points in each successive week. He's coming off a 171 rushing yard game in week 14 and could duplicate those running back one numbers versus the Jets, who are giving up the 10th most points to running backs this season. All right, a lot on the line this week, so listen to me. These are my 5 not so obvious players that you can trust in week 15.
Those high-salary DFS heavyweights help us launch another edition of Projection Junction. Cynthia is here, and we're going to profile, I should say, some of the best values in fantasy football and daily fantasy football this week. And I may call you Johnny Utah, because for each one of these, I want you to give me 2. Let's start with some nice values at the quarterback position. Now, which pair are you looking at?
I'm looking at a pair of Tom Brady, and that's an interesting one because you don't often get to say that. But I have 294 yards projected for him through the air, which is a lot, and 2 touchdowns. That's almost 19.76 fantasy points. So we like that one. And I also want to pair him with a young guy. So 1 old, 1 young. It only works well that way. Kyler Murray. This is an interesting one because of his rushing projection. 31 rush yards and a rushing touchdown projected, along with 242 through the air and just, 2 touchdowns. It's interesting because that Philadelphia defensive front is their strongest part of their team. So I think that means a lot of yards on the ground for Murray. So those are 2 pairs at the quarterback position. What else do you got for me?
How about a running back and a wideout for a Sunday Monday tournament?
Okay, so let's go with Jonathan Taylor at Houston. You pretty much want to take all running backs against Houston this season. 94 rush yards projected, a touchdown, 3 receptions, and 27 through the air for him. Houston's allowing the most rushing yards per game to running backs this season, and he's only the 8th most expensive running back on DraftKings. So you do that math. That's like 1, 8, carry the 2. Basically, just take Jonathan Taylor. That's what that nets out at. And then if you need a good value, Kimmy talked about it, and I'm going to back it up here. This one, Josh Reynolds. You're going to want to target this Jets game through the air. Well, 3 receptions, 46 yards, and a touchdown. Remember, that might not seem like the highest projection ever, but you're only paying the 76th lowest price, right? That's ridiculous. So that ROI is really good for you. You want to take that Josh Reynolds versus the Jets passing D.
All right, let's finish this up with a pair of players that have some value in Saturday's doubleheader.
Okay, let's go with Mike Davis. Anyone? You guys didn't hear yet. Oh, yeah. Breaking. Christian McCaffrey not playing. Just kidding. It's not breaking at all. 58 rush yards, a rushing touchdown, 4 through the air for 24 yards. The interesting part about this is, look, when it comes to Green Bay, you want to take into consideration that it could be a high-scoring game, which means they're probably going to use those short passes to Mike Davis. That's how this West Coast offense runs. So I like that. Even though the Green Bay Packers are slated to win and it's not necessarily a game script for running back, you still want to take Davis. And then you got to get your guy, Blondie McBlonderson. Oh, wait, Cole Beasley. That's a new nickname for him from me. XOXO. 5 receptions, 54 yards, touchdown for him. When you look to see the slot and the importance of the slot for Josh Allen, that's how Josh Allen keeps that play action going. That's how Josh Allen keeps his non-pressured completion percentage so high. He's 9th best in the NFL at that. So thank you, Cole Beasley, and thank you for the touchdown.
Big lineup decisions for everybody to make this week, so we know that all the questions you're asking, you're just asking for a friend. This one up to you first, Rank. We get these from social media, folks sending us their questions. And Trey wants to know, Jared Goff or Derek Carr?
Well, I already talked about how much I like Carr this week. I will say that Jared Goff's matchup is great, but they're going to run the football against the Jets, so I would actually sit Goff this week.
All right. Kimmy, this question coming from C. Rodriguez, wanted to know, Robbie Anderson or Tyler Lockett in a half-point PPR?
I'm going to go with Tyler Lockett on this one because I think my answer would have been different, but DJ Moore is returning for the Panthers. Now, the Washington football team secondary is going to try their best to lock up DK Metcalf, which hopefully opens up some opportunity for Tyler Lockett. So let's rock with Lockett on this one.
Sounds good. Cynthia, this one coming from Monty Stinson, wanting to know, in a half-point PPR, do you flex Nelson Aguilar or Brandon Cooks?
Monty, go with Brandon Cooks. I understand that Indianapolis's defense is tough as nails, But you got to look for volume, and the volume will go to Brandon Cooks. You saw what happened when you didn't have Will Fuller and you didn't have Brandon Cooks. Okay, well, now you get Cooks, so everything's going to be a little bit better for Deshaun.
This question coming from Nuke34576545, which sounds like a wild rundown at third base. Wanting to know, do you start Chris Carson or T.Y. Hilton in a 1-point PPR? I would say that this one is going to be T.Y. Hilton for me. Look, I've been saying for the last few weeks, I think T.Y. Hilton has the look of a league winner. He's just been playing really well. The matchups, the schedule works out well for him. Plus, I'm sort of worried about the Seahawks this week against that good Washington defense, so that scares me away from Chris Carson just a little bit. All right, go around again. This one back to you, Adam Rank. In a PPR league, Justin Herbert or Tom Brady, since they get so many targets?
Well, if it was standard, my answer would be completely different. I like Tom Brady in this one. He's had consecutive touchdown pass or doubled at least 2 touchdown passes in 4 consecutive games, 6 out of his last 7. He didn't have the yardage last week against Minnesota, but I like the matchup this week against the Falcons, one that Justin Herbert couldn't take advantage of last week.
All right, Kimmy, and this one for you, Nick Chubb or Cam Akers?
Humble brag, do both if you can. If you absolutely had to pick, I'd rock with Nick Chubb. We understand that offense wants to run the ball as much as possible, plus that Giants D. They're 24th against fantasy running backs, so Nick Chubb. But both are incredible this week, let's be clear.
Time now for Call Me Crazy, but some of our wild Week 15 predictions. Adam Rank, let's go.
Call me crazy, but Brandon Ayuk will be the top wide receiver this week. It seems like every fantasy analyst is diving in on Brandon. And of course, that means we're dooming the young man. But I'm going to be the crazy one who says number 1 this week against the Cowboys, who've allowed the most receiving touchdowns to wide receivers this year.
Call me crazy, but Midwesterners give the best sushi recommendations. And Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines both scored 20-plus fantasy points in Colts' huge win over the Texans. Both of them. Jonathan Taylor rushes for almost 100 yards. Nyheim Hines loves those pass catches, and that's how they get a nice big old victory.
All right, let's stick with these duos here. Call me crazy, but both Tua and Cam Newton, who face each other this week, are both going to rush for 50-plus yards. Tua, he's had 20-plus rushing yards in 2 of 6 starts. But the Patriots, they just allowed 55 rushing yards to Lamar Jackson back in Week 10. We know the rushing upside is there with Cam Newton. 50-plus rushing yards in 3 games this season. Both of these guys, it's a track meet. Mark my words.
Well, call me crazy, but Derrick Henry will run for 250 yards against the Lions for his second 40-point game of the season. Derrick Henry has 4 career 200-yard rushing games. 3 of them have come in the month of December. Not this December. That would be wild. Dalvin Cook, though, had 206 against the Lions in Week 9. Aaron Jones scored 45.6 points against the Lions in Week 2. So you put those things together, and Derrick Henry continues his run as being Mr. December. He's been a fantasy playoff MVP for the last couple of years, and there's a very good chance he could be that guy again. So anybody who has Derrick Henry in their lineup, congratulations. I'm just crowning you a champion right now. So enjoy that trophy.
Oh, thank
it's going to
you.
be great. You can get yours at NFL.com/fantasy trophy.